Thanks for joining us on another episode of Tea and Trowels, FPAN's new web series featuring conversations with archaeologists. Today, I'm joined with Dr. Della Scott-Ireton, archaeologist at the University of West Florida. Thanks for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself and your mug?
Sure. Hi, I'm Della Scott-Ireton. I'm the Associate Director for the Florida Public Archaeology Network. And my mug today features actually the Cayman Islands National Museum. And it's very near and dear to my heart because I did my doctoral dissertation work in the Cayman Islands in association with the museum. It's one of my favorite places on earth.
I'm jealous. I was supposed to be in Grand Cayman about a month ago today. For obvious reasons, that got canceled.
Right.
My mug today is extremely extra, but I figured this would be the perfect time to feature a ridiculous cat mug that is not only a cat mug, but it's a three-part cat where it seeps your tea for you. So there's actually tea in this, so I'm not going to tip it too far. But it's
well, and now I'm jealous.
Yeah, I just figured this was the craziest type of mug I could ever find in my life. And who would have thought I'd be hosting a series where we feature ridiculous mugs? All right, so we'll get started off with our first question here. And our first question is, why did you become an archaeologist?
That's a great question. I always love when I get asked that. And actually, that's all I've ever wanted to be, was an archaeologist. I never went through a phase of wanting to be, you know, a nurse or a ballerina or an astronaut or whatever else it is that little girls want to be. I only ever wanted to be an archaeologist, and it grew from when I was about 5 years old or so. My dad read me the How and Why Wonder Book of Lost Civilizations, and it was a fantastic book. There's a whole series of How and Why Wonder books. You know, I must have had 20 of them. You know, everything from birds to minerals to geology, all very sciencey based. But the Lost Civilizations was my absolute favorite, and it was all about archaeology. And Hiram Bingham and Machu Picchu and Pompeii and all these fantastic places. But the very last page, it was almost like an added in at the last, you know, kind of last thought. And now this is the early 70s, so it probably was. But the very last page was, and now archaeologists are going under the waves. And it was an underwater picture from, I think, the Cape Galedonia project that was going on with Dr. George Bass. And I can just remember sitting and staring at that photo and just thinking that was the coolest thing that I had ever heard of in my entire short life. And that's all I've ever wanted to do, is do archaeology. Not necessarily specifically maritime, although it was always in the back of my mind. But archaeology and the study of the past has always been my interest.
That's so cool. Even the phrase, now archaeologists are going under the waves, that phrase just kind of like stirs something with you.
I know, yeah.
You get excited, like under the waves, what? Exactly. Well, now kind of going into modern Della, in 30 seconds or thereabouts, what's your current research?
That's actually kind of a hard one to answer. I have a lot of irons in the fire. Of course, being in the admin position with FPAN, I don't get to focus on things too much. I'm getting around to all the other regional offices and doing lots of administrative kind of things. But my love for maritime archaeology and engaging the public in maritime archaeology and working with sport divers tends to sort of cross all those boundaries. So whether it's working with, have some dear colleagues that I'm working in the Pacific with on World War II battlefields, or all around Florida, like with our partners at the National Marine Sanctuary in the Keys, or anywhere else, and developing opportunities for sport divers to become involved, and developing ways for them not only go and visit sites, but to actually get involved in producing information instead of just consuming information. So really developing divers as citizen scientists is really where my research interests lie these days.
Oh, any way to get involved in archaeology as a citizen, or even like me as a young kid, would have jumped at the opportunity. So I think it's really great that we're archaeologists are getting more towards involving citizen scientists, especially with folks who are in the maritime fields, because a lot of it's require a lot of specialized training. And if folks have that specialized training, why not utilize them?
Exactly.
And so our next question will be, what is your favorite tool to do archaeology?
So I don't have any physical tools here with me. that I would have brought from the office. But when you sent me that question, I thought about it. And honestly, I think my favorite tool is not so much a physical tool, but a conceptual tool. And that is people's interest in archaeology. Because it's very rare that you go somewhere and talk about archaeology, or someone asks you what you do for a living and you tell them you're an archaeologist. You don't get some kind of, interested reaction. And I think that is a tool that we all can use to then launch into discussions about what archaeology is and what it isn't. That, it's not treasure hunting, it is the study of the past. And how people can get involved in their heritage locally. That's something that we see in FPAN, of course, a lot, is folks thinking about archaeology as being ancient Rome or ancient Greece or Egypt, and they don't think about the archaeology we have right here in our own backyards. And when you start explaining it, then the interest level just grows and grows. And so many people want to get involved in some way, whether it's getting their hands dirty or their head wet, or even just attending and learning more, attending lectures and tours and learning more. So I think that's my favorite tool overall of anything, is just people's interest in what we do.
Yeah. I never would have thought about that as a tool, but you're right. It's a great launching point. Mm-hmm. No matter where I go or what I'm doing, if I tell someone I'm an archaeologist, they're automatically conversation is derailed. We're going to be talking about archaeology, about what we do. Most of the time stressing the fact that I don't study fossils.
Right.
But at the same time, it's still people are really engaged with that subject and allows us to communicate really well. Mm-hmm. Kind of needs are what we're seeing within archaeological resources.
Yeah.
So for a bit of fun entertainment, what is your best, worst field story?
I think like a lot of maritime archaeologists, it involves the wildlife that we come into contact with. And I was working probably 10 years ago when I worked for the Florida Bureau of Archaeological Research. We were doing a project in the Apalachicola River. Which is pretty deep and pretty dark and murky and full of all kinds of wonderful Florida wildlife and sort of muddy. And we were looking for a site, and we'd anchored up in the middle of the river. And I got in the water first and immediately just kicked like hell to get to the anchor line because of the current. And so I grabbed hold of the anchor line and I turned to look for my buddy, and right over my shoulder was about a 5-foot alligator gar. And it's like, it had, I guess, heard me get in the splash and came to see what it was. And of course, they're prehistoric looking. They won't hurt you unless they jump out of the water and jump into you. But it startled me nevertheless, this big prehistoric thing hanging out over my shoulder. And so I got over that. My buddy finally caught up with me and we went down the anchor line. And you have to kind of go to the bottom. You don't kick against that current. So we go to the bottom and there are solution holes in the limestone bottom. You kind of pull yourself along Spider-Man style. And so I put my hand down on the bottom and put it directly on a turtle. And the turtle skittered away. And of course that scared me again. I was like, oh God. And so finally we kind of crawl our way across the bottom towards the shore, which is where we thought the site might be. And then all of these other little fish start coming around, like bass and brim, because we were stirring up the bottom. And so they were coming to see what we were stirring up for them to eat. But I was just like, I am not here for the life. I like things that are dead. And it was just like, I couldn't get my work done for all of the water life that was all around us. But that's proven to be a fun story ever since. It's first only time I've ever seen an alligator gar under the water.
Oh, yeah, I don't think I'd want to see one under the water or really ever. They're not.
No, once was enough.
Yeah. What was the site that you guys were looking for?
It was a site, we called it the Flintlock site, and it was a site, we were thinking that it might have been the site of where a party of U.S. Soldiers were attacked on a boat from some Seminoles who were on the bank during one of the Seminole Wars, Second Seminole War, I think. And so there had been some reports of wreckage in the water, and there was some wreckage there, but it looked like it was more of a modern barge. It was not remains of a period gunboat or riverboat. And there was also seemed to be like a kind of a catchment place in the river where the river made a bend there, and those solution holes would catch artifacts. And so we found everything from Native American ceramics to some period musket barrels, some other Native American artifacts, a Kaskaskia point, which is a Seminole rolled copper point, one of those cool Seminole ball and cone earrings, but also things like an iron, like a tailor's iron, like you iron clothes with. I mean, just all kinds of random things. So there was no really pattern to it. We think it was just a catchment area in the river. Though I understand some other people may be re-examining what was going on upland from there, and so there may be some different interpretations coming along. So it was a cool site.
Yeah, no, it sounds really cool and very a different type of environment to think about.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Not coral reefs and fishes.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in Salutrian holes, but they were on land, so yeah. You can imagine them underwater. It's pretty cool. So our next question is kind of a big one. It's the big overarching theme, and that is, how do you think that archaeology can save the world?
Well, that is a big one, and certainly it can't do it by itself, but then I don't think anything can. But I think that what we can learn from archaeology and from the study of the past in general is how people responded to and adapted to changes in their life in the past to ideally inform what we do in the present and the future. And something that's been bringing this to my mind lately with the COVID-19 pandemic, is everybody kind of comparing it to what went on in the 1920s with the influenza pandemic, and seeing what people did then, the social distancing measures that happened then, the reopening that happened, of course, a second wave that hit, and just sort of it's really brought home how we can look to the past. It may not necessarily have all of the answers, but we can certainly see what worked in the past and maybe what didn't work in the past. And you know, it's the old adage: if we don't learn from the lessons of history, we're doomed to repeat them. And I think that is absolutely true.
Yeah, I was reading some article. Now I'm not entirely sure if it's fully reputable or not. I'll double check my sources for this comment I'll be making. But they talked about the cultural changes that happened after the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic. And one of the common things in like classrooms or offices was to have a communal water cup. That's changed afterwards. Obviously now you have multiple mugs in your office, or you have in your classroom, you bring your own water bottle. But apparently it used to be a thing where people had shared objects like that. We have that recorded cultural shift, now seeing what's going to happen in this next cultural shift.
That's right. Something will change. Lots of things will probably change. And then what we took for granted last year, you know, the generations that come after us are going to be like, ew, communal, that's gross, you know? So,
right.
You're right.
The same thing that people were just like, what are thinking about? Now, keeping with the same theme of the pandemic, a little bit of whimsy for our talk show, I guess, is what is keeping you sane during our social isolation, distancing, or quarantine?
Well, a big thing is my husband. I really like my husband, turns out. So that works out really well. And I can't imagine anybody that I'd rather be cooped up in close quarters with than him. So we've been having a lot of fun. My two cats are very entertaining. I'm surprised they haven't been here to bother us during our little talk. But they've been a lot of fun. And then I think like maybe a lot of people have been doing a lot of sort of yard work and gardening. I live in a townhouse, so I don't have a whole big yard, which is one of the reasons I live in a townhouse. But I do have a couple little plots where I've been planting some flowers, and then some container gardening on my balcony with a lot of herbs. So I've been enjoying that a lot.
Oh, awesome. I've been doing the same thing with lots of planting of plants, and I learned that you can have potted plants delivered to your door. It's slightly dangerous.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
My challenge is keeping my own alive. So far, so good.
Yeah, so far. Now when we get back to real work, we'll see if we can keep it up.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on another episode of Tea and Trowels, and cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.